Well, greetings. My name is Bill Doc Walls, and I am the host of today's International Prolife Federation production of The Buffalo Soldiers and Black Cowboys. It's going to be done in two parts, two segments. It's going to be a very interesting discussion, so we want you to join with us and stay tuned. As you know, I'm also the director of the Committee for a Better Chicago, a public action agency that was formed to galvanize the community, restore democracy, and politically empower those who have traditionally been left out, disenfranchised, and denied equal opportunities. And one of the things that we do is we bring to you your history. And today we're joined by Tommy O. Pinson Jr. and Julia White, two of the living historians who represent the Buffalo Soldiers. Hello, Julia, how are you?
I'm just good, how are you?
Fine, thank you for asking. And Tommy, how are you?
Okay, Doc.
Good.
Okay, so.
Well, as we begin this discussion, let's start with a little history and background on the Buffalo Soldiers, who they were, how they got that name, and what they stand for, what they mean to America. Can you tell me when they got started?
Yes, sir. Back in the early 1800s, how the Buffalo arrived, their name were because of their hair. And the Indians proclaimed them that because of their woolly look hair.
I don't think he's getting enough volume from you. He'll increase it. You won't have to speak any louder.
Oh, speak?
Yeah. Say something.
Hello?
Talk a little bit. Talk a little bit.
Because of their woolly hair, the Indians.
Okay, he got you now.
Okay.
He got your volume. Julia, speak for him.
I'm Julia White, and I represent Cathy Williams, also known as
Okay.
William Cathy.
They got you. Okay. All right. Good. I'm glad we got a chance to start over.
Yeah, no, we're more relaxed.
Oh, yeah. There's no magic to
I'm
this.
always relaxed.
We're just here having fun.
I'm always relaxed.
Good afternoon, or good evening, good morning, whatever time you're watching this program. Greetings. Welcome to another presentation of the International Prolife Federation. Today's program will involve the Buffalo Soldiers and the Black Cowboys. I'm William Doc Walls. I'm hosting on behalf of Ernestine Stanberry, your producer. And today we're joined by Tommy O. Pinson Jr. and Julia White, two of the historians of the Buffalo Soldiers. They're wearing the original, the official uniforms worn by Buffalo Soldiers. And today we're going to talk about who the Buffalo Soldiers were, how they got their names, when they started, and what they mean to America. Tommy, Julia, it's good to see both of you.
Good to see you.
Tommy, let's begin by explaining to the audience when the Buffalo Soldiers originated and what cavalries they represented.
Yes, sir. Buffalo Soldier originated in the 1800s, being that after the slave time of the war, they derived and were able to join the military. They didn't really have combs or was able to do their hair, so as they entered into the military, infantry and cavalry, they were basically peacekeeping troops,
Okay.
soldiers. So what had happened is the name Buffalo coming from and deriving as calling the troops Buffalo Soldiers, the Indians had sort of put that stigma name on the soldiers because of their hair.
Was that the Comanches or the Cheyenne Indians?
I believe it was the Comanches.
The Comanches, okay.
I believe it was the Comanches.
And this was shortly after slavery. Slavery ended in 1865, and they were formed about 1866. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yes, sir.
Primarily in Texas and the southwestern portion of the country.
Arizona, yes, sir.
Arizona, Texas.
Correct.
And I understand there was some female Buffalo Soldiers. Were there females or was there a female?
There was a female, but she went into the military in 1866. She came out in 1868. She went in as William Cathy because she was somewhat illiterate. And at that time, they were only interested in whether she could carry the musket, run along miles and, long distance. So they didn't give her the type of physicals that they get now. So when she came out and she was trying to get her retirement allotment checks, they had no recollection of a female in there. And they looked at the records, Cathy Williams, William Cathy, and the way that she got in, she was 5'9" back in those days, 5'9", with short black hair, and she looked like a man.
How about that?
She did come out with papers,
Fantastic.
documents.
One thing about African Americans, we've always been patriotic and willing to serve our country, even under the most dire of circumstances. I mean, there were African Americans who served in the Union Army, who weren't even freedmen, but they were fighting for this country and fighting for the principles that we so adore. Can you tell me a little bit about the conditions that Buffalo Soldiers worked under and fought under? I mean, I understand they didn't get the best of equipment, the best of horses, best of uniforms. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Doc. That's correct. The conditions for the Buffalo Soldiers were lack of food. They always got cheated out of various things until you had some of our Afro-Americans come up in the ranks. As I continue to read the stories and keep up with the history of the Buffalo Soldiers as I do the Tuskegee Airmen, they were deprived of few things until some leaders stepped forth. I kind of like to base the Buffalo Soldiers off of the movie Glory with Denzel Washington. When some high officials saw that they were lacking and they were doing a good job, our Afro-American soldiers, they say, well, why deprive them of the things that they need? Sort of in the sense that it goes on today in our regular military.
Right.
You need equipment to do the job.
Right.
You can't do the job without the equipment.
And oftentimes, correct me if I'm wrong, Julia, they were the ones who were sent in first. They were
Right.
the front line of defense. Even though they
That's
were
true.
peacekeeping force, they were
Right.
sent in to quell the Indian uprisings and things of that nature. And we should use the proper terminology, the Native American uprising.
For sure. I'd like to say that Tamio is also a horseman. I'm a horseman myself. I don't ride very well now, but a lot of people wonder why I walk in the arena. At that time, the female was in the infantry, and most people, I have to explain that the infantry were the foot soldiers.
Right.
The cavalry were the horse riders.
Right.
And calico means the colored troop.
How about that? And actually, the Buffalo Soldiers were part of the 9th and 10th Cavalry of the United States Army. Is that right?
You had
Yes,
the-
but the female was in the 38th Infantry.
38th Infantry, the 27th,
27th.
9th, 10th, what he mentioned, the 27th, 38th
Yeah.
Infantry, different segments of the Buffalo Soldier and their missions.
Right. And the primary mission of soldiers in general is as peacekeeping or to be offensive minded. What was the mission of the Buffalo Soldiers when it was created?
Their mission was chasing the great warrior chief of the Apache, if I'm correct, wasn't Geronimo. In the event, well, I forgot his name.
It's okay.
It's not a long name. They was basically the bad segment of the Indians that our Buffalo Soldier mission was on.
Right.
So believe that they were police type actions.
So
Because-
how do groups and organizations around the country keep the Buffalo Soldier history alive? How do we remind people who the Buffalo Soldiers were and what they did for America?
Well, there's a chapter I belong to nationally, the Buffalo Soldiers 10th Cavalry Association, that sends me newsletters. I yearly pay a dues to the organization. I'm also invited, Julia, I'm also invited to a segment or a seminar that they have, which is different places. I believe their last one, Doc, it was in Washington.
And as they show pictures of the Buffalo Soldiers and what they looked like when they were in uniform and what they looked like as regiments, tell the audience about the organization that you represent, that you're the president of.
Well, my organization is basically simple. I am launching a non-for-profit organization. Stagecoach Production will be the umbrella of the Junior Buffalo Soldier Drill Team of Northwest Indiana. I'm not sure if I'm going to target Chicago area because I'll probably be limited to that area first. Depending on how large my staff create is dependent on letting the Illinois side kids in as participants. 10 to 17 years old is my target of the youth.
That's fantastic. And then Julia, how do you get these uniforms that you wear?
We go all the way to Evansville, Indiana, where they have a lot of authentic clothing that they wore back in the Civil War days. Tamio has ordered us saddle pads and things for our horses. They have the old-fashioned canteens, and just everything is what you would see back then. It's very authentic. I'd like to also say one way we keep them alive and keep them in the memory of the children, we go into the schools and to the YMCAs and churches, and we do presentations and seminars and show them, tell them different stories, which our stories are for real.
Yeah.
But we tell stories about the Buffalo Soldiers, and we bring in different paraphernalia and the canteens and the lanterns and things like that that they used to use.
You know, oftentimes in life you do things because you get paid to do them, but then there's some things that you would do for absolutely nothing, for free. And it's obvious that this is one of those things that the two of you would do for free under any and all circumstances.
We enjoy it.
Yes, sir.
It's mostly the exposure, and letting our children know, and all children, period. We're about children.
And how do children react when they see you in your authentic uniform and when you tell them the stories of who Buffalo Soldiers were? What's their reaction?
They love it.
I've had some come up to us, a couple of schools we did, when we was able to bring horses. They make you laugh and give you an angel of a light when they say, "Oh, I want to be like you. How do I become that?" So I'm carrying on the Jesse White legacy in the Northwest Indiana.
How about that?
Because him and Dad Murdoch, who's our leading cowboy, were my mentors, or have been my mentors, and still are.
Right.
So by going to war, I'm kind of bringing it to the neighborhood.
Exactly. That's phenomenal. And as you do that, you meet a lot of people along the way.
Yes, you
And
do.
how are they impacted by your stories and your presentation?
Very positive. I remember when they opened the new Soldier Field, Murdoch, the president of Broken Arrow Horseback Riding Club, and I went, and I was dressed in the Buffalo Soldier, and some people looked at me like, and then there was one military big wheel. He says, "I know who you are," and we were surprised that he knew. He said, "You're the female, the Cathy Williams," which made me feel really good, that somebody knew who I was dressing like or tried to emulate or tried to represent or be like, so it was really nice, and they took me on to the other part of we got into the main sections of the new
Fantastic.
opening of the Soldiers Field.
We talked earlier about the equipment and the materials that Buffalo Soldiers were forced to work with. And one of the things that we agree is that oftentimes they got the hand-me-downs. After somebody else had used it and worn it out, it was handed down to the Buffalo Soldiers, and they had to make the most of it. Tell me how Buffalo Soldiers would get from one area to the next, and oftentimes they had to travel, 100 miles to get from one post to the other post. Tell me the riding style that they would use to ensure that their horse was still ready when they got there.
Basically, they would stay in groups. You would have a scout, doc, out there as I read the history or have read the history, normally it would be an Indian scout on our side. They would stay in groups. Your highest ranking of the Buffalo Soldiers as they group would be first sergeant, down to the corporal or the private. But normally, if there was a team of Buffalo Soldiers that needed to break off to scout a different area, usually the highest ranking person within that group would go that direction, while another group will go into the opposite direction. But they basically didn't wander off. They stayed bond.
How were they treated by white troops?
Not well at all. I don't think, as I read or been reading the history, that they were basically trying to show off.